Hello and welcome to our Azure DIY Season 2. And this is our first episode. Sorry, it took quite a long time from the Season 1 to start of the Season 2. But the amazing news is we are here and we are happy to help you with whatever questions you have and all the amazing Azure stories. And guess what? Today I'm wearing the Vegas t-shirt. You know why? Because I'm really missing all those amazing conferences that we go to, learn so much, meet some amazing people. But guess what? I've got one more amazing people from the Microsoft side to talk us through what are the hurdles that we have seen on the Azure DevOps journey and how we actually went through it, fixed all our hurdles, and currently really releasing so many versions and so many products so quickly and so efficiently. So welcome Anthony Borton. I'm going to put Anthony Borton live and there you go.
Or me. Woohoo! Fantastic. All right, thanks for such a wonderful welcome, Sri. So just as we get started, I just wanted to call out the LinkedIn community that we've started. So if you'd like to keep informed of everything happening with Azure DIY, please feel free to go onto LinkedIn and join this community. I'll just leave that there for a moment for everyone to have a look at it. Sri, are you still talking to me? No, that's all right.
No, you go ahead. It's all yours.
All right. So just while we wait for just another couple of minutes, let's start with a few questions. I believe you should be able to answer these in the chat window, and we've got people looking at that chat window to see who comes up with the answer first. All right, our first question. How many repositories are on GitHub, public and private, as of January 2020? So at the start of the year, were there 90 million, 110 million, 190 million, or a staggering 210 million repos? What do you think? Peter, are you going to call out and let me know if there's a correct answer?
Yeah, put your answers on the Q&A section.
Q&A section? Awesome.
Yes.
Thanks, Sri.
Yes. And also, just to let you know, guys, this session is recorded, and also while Anthony's talking about Azure DevOps and also the DevOps journey and GitHub and everything, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it into the Q&A section.
Oh, so all the hardest questions you can think of, right into the Q&A section there. Give them a challenge, right, Sri?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, I'm going to make it just a wee little bit easier. Let's make one of those answers disappear. I feel like a game show compere. This is awesome. Anyone volunteering answers in the chat yet? The Q&A?
I've got some answers. 190 million.
Ooh, okay. Let's narrow it down further. So 190 million is still in the running. So we're down to 90 or 190.
There is also another answer, which is 100 million, which is not there in the option, but still we have that answer.
Excellent. I like that innovation. Let's just pick our own answer. All right, let's go with the answer. And it was 190 million. Did we have a winner?
We have so many winners.
Awesome. They're all winners.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go with another question just while we wait. Which language is GitHub mainly written in? So we've got some interesting options and choices up there. So let's see if we can get some answers in the Q&A window. This time I'm going to make it a little easier. I'm going to make two of them disappear. Ready? Two of them be gone. So we're down to C# on ASP.NET or Ruby on Rails. And as much as I really have my own personal favorite, I think my favorite's about to disappear. So the answer is Ruby on Rails. Did we get some good answers in the Q&A window?
Yeah, only one answer, Ruby on Rails.
Yeah. All right. I think we've got, if my memory serves me, maybe it's just one more question just while we give people a couple of minutes to connect. So when was GitHub launched? So Git's been around a little while. So Git, of course, predated GitHub. So when did GitHub arrive? Was it 2004, 2006, 2008, or 2010? All right, let's narrow the field. right? And the correct answer, GitHub was launched in 2008. Okay, and it's come a long way since then, as you could well imagine. Yay, all right, be gone. So, the session title I've changed just a wee little bit. That's just some poetic license from the presenter. In terms of our journey story, I'm going to talk about a variety of different teams across Microsoft and how they've made their DevOps transformations. And while there is some commonality across them, there's some interesting differences as well. By way of introduction, so my name's Anthony Borton. I'm a DevOps architect, and over the last 3 years, I've worked with Microsoft's largest customers to help them accelerate their DevOps transformation. Over the last 10 years, I've been averaging about 244,000 kilometers in the air. This year, not so much. Along with the rest of Azure DevOps engineering, I made an interesting transition in the middle of the year, and we moved over to our new home, and that home is GitHub. So the agenda for today, I'm dividing the content largely into two. In the first section, I'm going to just quickly readdress or look at our definition of DevOps at Microsoft. And then we're going to go and look at 3 different teams. I'm going to look at the XREO team, Microsoft Core Services, and the 1ES team, and see how these teams have adopted DevOps, and what were some of the results of the experiments they did, and what are some of the lessons that they learnt, lessons that perhaps you can use in your organization as well. Following that, I'll share some resources where you can go and find out more about these things, including the videos you'll see and the textual case studies that you'll be able to go and have a look at, share, learn more about in your own time. And then I'm going to finish the session today with a topic of GitHub and Azure DevOps, what you need to know. So I want to talk a little bit about Microsoft's acquisition of GitHub. And for those of you that aren't aware, I want to talk about our strategic direction and where we're going and give you some insight into why. So that's what's in store for us over the next hour. All right, so before we talk about DevOps, it's really important to define what we mean when we say DevOps. I often say that if you put 2 people in a room and ask for a definition of DevOps, you're probably going to get 3 different answers, because everywhere you go, there's people have their idea of what DevOps is. At Microsoft, our definition is that DevOps is the union of people, processes, and technology to continuously deliver value to customers. And we chose this definition very carefully, really thinking about every word there. I'm not going to say it's the right definition of DevOps, but it's the one that resonates best for us. Okay, I don't know that anyone can claim the right or a necessarily best definition, but this one works. On the right-hand side, you can see what we talk about when we talk about continuously delivering value to our customers. Before going any further, I really want to call out the topics of people, process, and technology. When you start talking about DevOps, it's really easy to get straight into the technology. Well, a lot of us are technology junkies. We love this stuff. We start talking about agile planning, CI/CD, infrastructure as code, and all sorts of things. But when organizations try to embrace DevOps, they find the challenges are not necessarily in the technology part. It's more often a challenge around the people and processes. As we prepare to look at the journeys that teams across Microsoft have done, you're going to see how these teams have come together, how the technology enables the process and the cultural changes as DevOps is being implemented. Let's talk for a bit about some of the challenges that we, at least at Microsoft, see. Microsoft has a really wide portfolio of products that we deliver to our customers. Think of how the Xbox business is different to Bing, or how Visual Studio is different to Office. Each of those businesses have different cultures, and trying to implement DevOps across them has been quite a challenge for the organization. Microsoft has been building software for decades now, long before DevOps was a thing. DevOps has really only been on the radar, say 10 years. We've been building software for over 45 years now, and we were successful. So, modernizing our business has been very critical, but also very challenging. We have a lot of people. With 140,000 people spread across almost every country, the challenge of changing people and cultures amplified significantly for Microsoft. We've also got different team sizes with different maturity levels. Teams like Windows have been around for a long time and have a lot of legacy code they've got to deal with. This also comes into play when you try and adopt DevOps. So the large degree of variation across our teams has been a big challenge. Now we want to start looking at specific cases of different teams across the company. And you're going to see what these, you're going to see that these are really different stories with different challenges involved. Okay, for the first one, I'm going to start with Xbox REO. That's the team that's building Xbox game streaming, also known as xCloud, you may have heard it, which is our cloud streaming service that we announced earlier this year. For these wonderful little devices, I can, fire up Call of Duty and play Xbox, stream that without any problems at all. Okay, so let's hear from the team themselves.
XREO started out as an operations team, and our job was to operate the Xbox Live platform. There are the Xbox Live developers, and then there are operations teams that support the platforms that their code runs on. The responsibility landed on the service engineers to make sure that the platform stayed available, but they had no power to go fix the code if it was broken. It was very reactive. We were fighting fires most of the time.
How do we integrate both service engineering teams or operations team? We want to work smart rather than work hard.
In 2018, our team was approached to take on support of a new streaming service that Microsoft was building.
We immediately realized that we probably need a dedicated team for the platform when making sure that the platform itself scales.
And answering that scale problem became the focus of not only our tooling, but also all of our process design.
We're trying to reach as many gamers as possible across the world, so we need a large-scale cloud solution, and Azure definitely offers that to us today.
We started with containers. To build on containers, Kubernetes was the clear choice as an orchestration platform. The Azure Kubernetes service really drove a lot of the management problems and did it for us. So we could focus on managing the platform, the distribution, and the scale.
The CI/CD pipeline allows us to basically scale out our development process where we can build a service, have it packaged as a Docker container, and then deploy to all our production in a matter of minutes.
We started embracing the tools that they are already using for running our automation.
Having the SRE team was a great help to us. It would take care of our infrastructure, make sure it's always up to date, while we can focus on building our services.
Our role has fundamentally changed. Now in the SRE role, we build the platform with the devs, and we are part of their deployment process. We're really focused on building and improving rather than burning down checklists.
We're always in contact with them, and we discuss in forums what we want to do to better our platform.
They're looking forward, and they're pulling us in as trusted partners within their program.
We're very happy with our collaboration because together we can build a much better service.
Alrighty, fantastic. So let's start by looking at how this team started. It's a very typical scenario that I see in many customers where you have a dev and an ops team. My suspicion is that a few of you listening in today will be in the exact same situation where you've got dev and you've got ops. If you think back to the DevOps wheel that we saw earlier, you'll see that these two teams really owned different parts of the wheel. The dev team did the planning, the ideation, the architecting of the system. They made the technology choices and of course did the development, the dev team. They then handed over the service they built to the ops team who had to deploy it onto certain infrastructure and operate it. This meant anything from incidents to customer problems that came up. And it's a very classical dev and ops challenge. The same kind of problems that you can imagine came about. For example, the ops team had to operate and support something they didn't design. They weren't the subject matter experts. They worked in a firefighting mode. They couldn't really change the code. They didn't have a good relationship with devs. So the stressed relationship between dev and ops has been a big pain point. So what changed? How the team solved this was really interesting. Let's look at their approach and what they did to transform the way they worked. To begin with, the development team brought in the operations team early, and they made the choice together to use containers. This allowed the dev team to focus on everything inside the containers, and on this occasion they chose to use .NET Core running in Linux containers. At the same time, the ops team has become an SRE team, and they own the infrastructure, and they can make their own technology choices around that. So they decided to use Kubernetes, and for them, the Azure Kubernetes service was a really great fit, as it removed a lot of the complexities for them to manage the Kubernetes cluster. Now that ownership is well defined because of the technology choice, each team now kind of owns its own delivery. The development team owns everything inside the containers, which means they do their own CI/CD for delivery of new code inside those containers. They own this, they're accountable for it. If there's an urgent hotfix at 2 a.m., they need to do that, and they need to get the code into the containers. The ownership and accountability is really pivotal for the entire DevOps model. At the same time, the SRE team really started putting in place automation and CI/CD into their processes. For them to do that, they had to adopt a new kind of practice. It was infrastructure as code. They had to work with text files, sometimes JSON, sometimes YAML, and they used the same tooling, Azure pipelines, that the dev team used in order to be able to get things out. So that was a really good approach for them. Okay. So the results of what they came up with. Some of the key results. Firstly, an improved SLA. They could make it a little bit more aggressive, providing our customers with a higher level of guaranteed service. So that's a huge win. Moving from ops to SRE, even changing the name helped, as the ops folk took on the title engineers and felt closer to the dev team. Next, they now focus on scale and further automation rather than firefighting. That's how they want to work now. They just want to focus on what really matters for the service. They want to make it more robust instead of just running around solving problems and putting out fires. The level of automation they've achieved is really quite remarkable. They can now deploy to a new region of the service by changing just 6 lines of code. And that really exemplifies the power of infrastructure as code. And then finally, with all that automation they achieved, at the end of the day, it really improved morale in the team. They're just happier. They build products they own, and they're accountable for that. So that's been a great transformation. Let's go over some of the learnings from this case study. Firstly, it's important that everyone participates at all stages. In this case, the operations team didn't really participate in the planning and technology choices, but once they were brought in, they could really help architect the system that they could own in the production environment. The technology choice really helped define areas of ownership. In this case, with the choice of containers, there was a clear delineation. Devs owned what was inside the container. Operations owned the operation of those containers and the hosting of them. That really helped collaboration through a clarity of understanding. Infrastructure as code really helped the team with reliability and automation, and helped them move away from this firefighting mode into an improvement mode that led to them being able to offer better SLAs for our customers. And finally, They used the managed services in Azure that really helped the team with their use of AKS and Azure Monitor. The teams could then focus more on what really mattered in delivering that service to our customers. Our next case study is Microsoft Core Services, previously known as MSIT. Let's see what they did.
We're working on an enterprise scale of how we run IT in the biggest IT company in the world.
The dev teams were responsible for building internal applications like HR and payroll. The manageability platforms team were responsible for the management and monitoring of the underlying infrastructure.
We work with hundreds of applications across the IT portfolio. All the hosting infrastructure was centralized. When you wanted to run an application, you would have to go and provision servers.
When Azure came around, teams were encouraged to innovate, try things out. Having control over their own subscriptions, that meant that there was no centralized IT team doing anything to continue to maintain control. We realized we had to rethink our model. In 2017, Azure Monitor became mature enough that we saw parity between that and the existing monitoring software. That's when we had the idea we should decentralize this service and have dev teams do the monitoring themselves.
Some teams were more advanced than others, and some teams were not willing to change.
It wasn't something that they knew how to do. They hadn't traditionally done that kind of monitoring before.
We built toolkits, we built examples, we built documentation. We had consulting sessions with them about how to go and build this for themselves.
There was some resistance within my own team as well. They felt like they weren't even sure what their future role would be. Is there still a job for me? Being one of the people who carried the message of the culture change, it was really intimidating. You're not always saying things that people are excited to hear. While there were some frustrations, overall it was better for the company and better for the businesses. All of the Azure Monitor is just built into Azure. You don't have to build out servers. You can just start using it.
It allows dev teams to connect directly their log analytics instance to Power BI. We actually saw a lot of freedom from them building things that we've never even thought about.
We're no longer in the day-to-day business of monitoring applications. My team can focus more on large-scale enterprise scenarios that are related more to governance of our environment. There's an ease in that relationship with the dev teams because there are things that they want us to do rather than things that they feel forced to do. Today, our relationship with the development teams is more of a partnership.
All right, so there we go, great. So the MSIT team was responsible for running all of our internal line of business applications like time reporting, HR, things along those lines. These were all centralized services. If you see in the slide, Dana and Diego would be the middlemen between the operations team and the development teams. They would own the server that you see on-prem on the right-hand side. They would be responsible for the security and compliance of those servers. And whenever the dev team would have an application to run, they would hand them over to that team. And that team would have to go and deploy it to the environment. That also meant that if something went wrong in production, then the core services team would have to monitor it and set up alerts so they could triage issues and then try to find the right team to investigate the problem and fix it. So they would have to own the entire monitoring for the applications, even though they didn't build them. On top of that, especially on Diego's side, they would also be responsible for collecting all of the data and logs. And that's mostly for the purposes of reporting, creating dashboards, and things along those lines, making sure that the right data was being collected. And these would be available for the dev team to consume. So very, very busy as middlemen in the equation. So as the organization transformed to the cloud, core services ended up with a new model. The first challenge was that each dev team would have their own Azure subscription, and with that, they could build whatever they want and use whatever technologies, which is exactly the way they liked it, because they could move fast. But as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And they would have to be accountable for the security and compliance of their own subscription, and the core services team that doesn't own the environments can't do it for them. Okay. In the new model, dev teams are now responsible for monitoring their own applications, and they can do that with Azure Monitor, which is built into the system, which allows them to monitor without too much technical expertise. Finally, they can create their own dashboards and use Power BI to find and see the data that's most important for them. It helps them gain valuable insights into the application that they're now responsible for. So what's left for the core services team? Okay, well, what that core services team is able to do is they can work with creating code samples and toolkits. They can deliver training to the teams. They can deliver guidance. They can create resource manager templates. So they've transformed from being the middlemen in the story to being the trusted consultants to help guide the teams. They're not the bottleneck. Okay, looking at some of the results here, we've seen that a much quicker time to resolve incidents. Okay, because the feedback loop between when an incident happens and monitoring is just quicker because it goes straight to the dev teams. We also saw more meaningful and actionable alerts, because when the dev teams themselves define the alerts, they know they're the subject matter experts in their applications, and they know what best to look for. They know what is the right action to take from the right alerts. Another result was that the manageability platform team, or Microsoft Core Services team, were really empowered now to become consultants, and were able to focus on bigger things rather than the mundane daily running around and firefighting. And finally, in the end, it was a better relationship between the teams, because the Core Services team was no longer a bottleneck between the devs and where they wanted to deploy their code. Instead, they're trusted partners, and they can help and guide and provide their expertise to those teams. A few of the learnings from this particular case study. The first one is that the move to the cloud is not easy, and it really requires all of the teams to adapt, not just the dev teams, but of course the ops teams and the IT department as well. Managed services really helped move the accountability between the teams. So the fact that Azure Monitor is easy to set up and you don't really need that much expertise, it's just built in. Installing all of the Azure services really helped that handover of responsibility of monitoring from the core services teams to the development teams. On top of that, subject matter experts are better positioned to monitor, operate, and do the reporting for their own applications because they know them best. And finally, the transition to the consultant role really helped the team focus on bigger initiatives and find the new place, the place they wanted, the new role within the company. So that was another great result. And the third and final team we're going to have a look at, this is 1ES. Okay, it's a very different kind of story where we really kind of try to look at how do we scale the cultural change, that DevOps mentality across a company the size of Microsoft. How do we make all teams across Microsoft high performing? Let's hear from the team.
What's a high performing team at Microsoft?
We want to see a highly collaborative team that works well together. We're not just a set of individuals. We want that team to understand their customer very well.
We want everyone to be building quickly and learning continuously and be happy and sustainable teams. You need top executives to say this is important. And if it's very important, you need a dedicated team for this.
The One Engineering System effort at Microsoft is designed to accelerate and improve engineering across all of Microsoft's products and services.
We're saying we're going to take a significant number of people and set them 100% on building better tools, building better processes, building better culture, figuring out what teams need. Microsoft has been around for a long time.
There's so many different teams, so many different products, so many different customers to address.
Teams of different sizes are going to have different tooling needs. They're going to have different process needs, different communication needs. We began at One Engineering System focusing on tooling.
Let's create a set of great tools all of Microsoft could use. One ES relies heavily on Azure. One of the things that we get from the cloud is the ability to accelerate. The journey through One ES was an interesting one. You can build great tools, but if the team does not change how they behave, it's not going to affect the bottom line.
So it came back to very human factors that are really the same in any company. One of the challenges we're starting with is really siloing. That's very common in big companies. Changing a culture at any size company is really hard. Changing it at a company that spans pretty much every country in the world, 140,000 employees, it's incredibly difficult. We do a lot of experiments because we don't actually know what's going to work. We have a set of outcomes in mind.
We like to start small, gain success, learn from that, and then expand.
Part of all of this is really making it safer for people to try new things, new approaches, new tools, making it easier for people to speak up. When you're listening to teams, they're going to bring up things that aren't working, and that's how you can figure out how to fix them.
We've seen some fantastic results from some teams. Teams that usually took a year or more to ship are able to ship multiple times per day.
The biggest immediate thing we've really seen is actually employee satisfaction. Teams that have invested in creating more psychological safety, who've invested time in improving their collaboration, making more inclusive meetings, they are shipping better things. We're seeing customer satisfaction rise as a result.
I'm very proud of what we've achieved.
All right, so as you've just heard, this story was about Microsoft's One Engineering System team. This is a story about the way Microsoft approaches scaling cultural change and trying to drive it across the entire company. As I mentioned before, Microsoft is a really big company and we have a lot of different teams. If you really want to change the engineering culture of the biggest software company in the world, you really need to have commitment. In our case, this was setting up a team that's 100% devoted to helping other teams become high performing. So let's see a bit about how they were able to go and help other teams become high performing. First of all, they focused on tools. They find the best tools that Microsoft believes developers should use and then help onboard teams to those tools. That's challenging, I'm sure you can imagine. If a team is used to a particular tool, if they've got their own favorite, and you're going in there recommending that they should change, well, you've got to listen, you've got to understand why they want or why they like their particular tool, and writing roughshod over them saying you must change without good justification is, well, that's not going to work well at all. You really need to come to the teams. And if you just tell them, hey, start using these tools and not these tools, you're not going to get a lot of progress. What they really learned along the way is that you really need to listen to teams, and for that you need to create a thing called psychological safety. This refers to the culture, an environment where team members feel safe to raise concerns and to be able to talk about failure, safely. They also learned they had to provide very different kinds of engagement models. For some really big teams like the Windows team or the Office teams, they have really long engagements because these teams can't change their culture very, very quickly. They can't change things in a week or two. In many cases, they actually go and embed a member of the One ES team inside those teams and say, hey, congratulations, you're now part of the Office team, go and work with them. So, big teams needed big long-term engagements compared to the smaller teams. And lastly, it's all about inner sourcing. Not everyone's heard of the term, but inner sourcing is really about taking the practices of open source, which is collaboration, wide-scale collaboration, and putting that inside our organizations, allowing teams to see the code and contribute code outside those traditional team-based boundaries. So what were some of the results? The first thing they saw was employee satisfaction go up. When you're really listening to teams and working closely with them to help overcome their challenges, they become happier, more content. On the more practical side, daily releases were a great result. Some teams used to release every few months, so now they've moved to at least daily, and many teams now deploy multiple times per day. That's the new norm. Another result was that build times were greatly reduced, and in some cases, our builds went from taking multiple days down to just hours, and in some cases, even less than that. So faster, tighter feedback loops were a great win. Another interesting result was that it's a great way to standardize on things, particularly in areas that are non-negotiable for us when we're building a product. Things like security, compliance, and accessibility, things that we want to see in all of our products. Some of the key learnings. The first thing, and this was mentioned in the video, leadership commitment is critical. So if culture change is something the organization wants to do, it's important that someone from leadership is committed to that change. And that commitment went all the way to the top to our CEO, fully committed and backing OneES. Second, tools are not enough, and we heard that several times across the case studies, and I think we saw that in other case studies as well. You choose the technology, but it's really important that you also change the way you work, the way you think about processes, the way you collaborate with other teams. We learned that different teams require different engagement models. Some of our teams are really big and they have lots of legacy code. The Windows team is a typical yardstick we talk about when you talk about large legacy code and big teams. And finally, experimentation is really a key part of how OneES is finding ways to help teams. They often going in, they don't know what's going to work with each different team. They build experience across teams over time, but what works for one team doesn't necessarily work for every team. So be prepared to go in and experiment, try things and see what the result looks like. If you want to hear more or a little bit more about one of the OneES approaches, cultural change, and maybe kind of adopt some of their practices, we actually have a white paper that Cindy wrote that speaks to maybe the first 5 steps you can take as far as leading your organization to promote culture change that really empowers our teams. Secondly, Cindy also did another webinar that's available. The link's there on the screen for you, and you can watch that webinar to learn about how they've really worked to drive engineering cultural change. There's a few other resources there. So those videos and in-depth written case studies are available for you on the Microsoft website. So you can download those and really learn more about that cultural change. In Azure DevOps Engineering, we had a lot to do as well. We had to change from shipping a boxed product, that was Team Foundation Server, and we shipped that every couple of years. We had to change so much about how we worked to ship Azure DevOps services in the cloud, something that we then need to support, maintain. We need to maintain high-level SLAs across the globe. So that was a really big transformation specifically for this team. All right, so in moving to part 2 of the presentation, in this part of the presentation, I want to talk about Azure DevOps and GitHub, what you need to know. Disruption affects every industry and no company is safe. We've all heard about the now classic examples of Blockbuster being ousted by Netflix, Lyft and Uber disrupting the traditional taxi industry, and even Twitter changing how we consume news and media. Half of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 are now gone, replaced by organizations that deliver value faster, better, and cheaper than the incumbents did. And the current Fortune 500, well, they very much face the same fate. Technology plays a central role in the disruptors' ability to execute and out-innovate their competition. There are 3 powerful trends at play that affect how we build software today. Firstly, we have an insufficient supply of developers. So enabling developers with their preferred tools is one key to recruitment and retention of those staff. 99% of code bases include open source software. So it's essential that you need to secure your use of open source and pay close attention to your software supply chain. And the third, companies are struggling to adopt DevOps, which evidence suggests is critical for success today. 93% of implementations aren't optimized. So, these are trends that we need to factor in and consider. I want to give you an example to help illustrate how software is built today. This is a fictitious company, Coffee Roasters Online, or Coffee Roasters Inc. we'll call them for now. And Coffee Roasters were a great small business. They were, ethically sourcing a single point of origin beans. They were brewing a beautiful coffee and selling that to very loyal customers in person. And then, of course, the pandemic arrives. They realized they needed to pivot, they needed to change, they needed to build a strong online presence. So they put together a small team of developers. That small team of developers looked to the market and they decided that they were going to use ASP.NET Core, and they were going to host their website, their infrastructure on Azure. They're a coffee company. They're not into buying and hosting servers and those sorts of details. So the cloud was a perfectly good choice for them. They did their homework on ASP.NET Core, and they found that NOP Commerce has been downloaded over 3 million times. They decided to use that as their key platform for an e-commerce solution. And in making that decision, their team size grew by 91 contributors around the globe. And suddenly they've got over 12,000 commits. Okay, that's a good start. Now, NOP Commerce is open source, and it depends on many other open source components. Okay, choosing just one of them, something called Humanizer, which is, let's just say it's a library to help developers be more productive. Adding Humanizer, that increased the team size by 184 contributors and over 2,000 commits. And that's just one open source dependency that NOP Commerce has. There are dozens and dozens of others. And I've already stated that the team chose to use ASP.NET Core. That adds 621 contributors today and close to 45,000 commits. So before they even write their first line of code, the team size has swelled to, with other dependencies, well over 1,000 contributors around the world working to solve the challenges and problems of a modern online web store. So that's a very common scenario today. So looking at that a different way, what we learn is that for modern enterprise applications, if that enterprise application has 1 million lines of code and we deploy that application, of those 1 million lines of code, our developers may have actually written just as little as 10% of the code. The rest of that code today comes from the open source world. And most of that lives on GitHub. You'll see in the slide there some of the very well-known open source projects that are available. Okay, I suspect that for many of you, that might be quite an eye-opener to know that most of the code in the applications our development teams build doesn't come from those teams. Okay, that's true. It might change a little bit, but proportionally, that's quite accurate. So, armed with how software is changing and the importance of open source in modern enterprise applications, it really shouldn't come as a surprise that back in early June 2018, Microsoft announced that it had reached an agreement to acquire GitHub. Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. If you look at this in terms of Azure repos inside Azure DevOps, the code that lives there could be as little as just 10% of the actual code we're deploying. So now that you bring GitHub into the equation, we've got a lot more visibility over the entire software supply chain. Azure DevOps, which has been incredibly successful, empowers thousands of our customers with over 15 years of innovation focused more specifically at enterprises. That's been a sweet spot for Microsoft. Now we're taking it and bringing it together with GitHub, which is the home for open source. And when we announced that acquisition, I think there were close to about 28 million registered users on GitHub. As of June 2020, we have over 50 million registered users of GitHub. So, something that's great with great strengths for the enterprise, bring that together with the home of open source software on the planet. The first step we've already taken is to merge our engineering teams so that Azure DevOps and GitHub have the same leadership. We started that process quite a while ago. So in Microsoft's org chart, if you went and found me and you went step, you'd find Nat Friedman. Nat's the CEO of GitHub. We've had that shared leadership in place now for quite a while. Earlier this year, 1st of July, all of Azure DevOps engineering moved across to GitHub. Now, we were already under shared leadership. Now it's just, I get to replace this shirt with the GitHub hoodie. And that means we can bring the experience from both groups of engineers together. And our goal there is to make GitHub so successful. We want so much innovation there, but it will build its own gravity. It'll pull developers in because that's where developers want to go to work. Okay. As far as Azure DevOps goes, we're still fully committed to Azure DevOps. We do our 3-week releases. There's still a public features timeline that shows what we're doing, what the roadmap for Azure DevOps looks like. We've announced publicly that should we decide to deprecate Azure DevOps, we would give customers at least 5 years advance notice of that intention. And we haven't even started that conversation yet. So if you're on Azure DevOps today, you're well able to stay there. You'll be able to take advantage of those releases every 3 weeks as you have been today already. Now, that said, our investments in GitHub and the innovation that is occurring in GitHub is happening at a much greater rate. Acquisitions like NPM earlier this year by GitHub, we bring that into GitHub. There'll be features, capabilities in GitHub that exist today and that will exist in the future that won't necessarily be backported over to Azure DevOps. So over time, GitHub will become even better than it is today, and we want to pay attention to that so that we can take advantage of that innovation and capabilities to deliver our value faster. Microsoft currently has over 25,000 employees using GitHub, with over 10,000 public and over 2,000 private repositories split over various GitHub organizations, including Microsoft, Azure, Microsoft Docs, and they're leveraging all GitHub features, including GitHub Actions, GitHub Packages, and more. In addition, Microsoft runs multiple installations of GitHub Enterprise Server. Microsoft also has tens of thousands of repositories on Azure DevOps, and we're evaluating what's required to move those over to GitHub. We're working closely with each team to find the best solution and transition path for them, while not interrupting their workflows and letting them focus on their business. So over time, the majority of our source control, source code will be moving from Azure repos over to GitHub. And And we want to take full advantage of some of the much better inner sourcing capabilities of GitHub. We want to take advantage of some of the great built-in security of GitHub, things like Dependabot and even GitHub Advanced Security with CodeQL and a whole lot more. So that's what we're doing today. As far as it goes, if you look at our the crossover, the overlap between products, when you look at source, you'll see that based on Git, we have both Azure repositories supporting both centralized and distributed version control, and we have GitHub in the same space. If we look at CI/CD, we've got Azure pipelines, which our enterprise customers love, but also now there's GitHub Actions v2. And GitHub Actions v2 started life as a fork from Azure pipelines. So there's a lot of similarity, as you'd expect. So with GitHub Actions, we have runners so that we can build and deploy code on Linux boxes, Mac, and Windows machines quickly and easily. Okay. GitHub Actions has been envisaged as not just CI/CD, but as an automation environment. So it will actually grow, and already is growing well beyond CI/CD. You can use GitHub Actions today to automate all manner of things beyond just build and release. And then when we look at managing our code packages, also built on industry standards, we've got Azure Artifacts for NuGet, NPM and the like, and GitHub packages. So where these things coexist, I guess organizations and teams need to make an informed decision as to which tool should they use. For most organizations today, if you're using Azure DevOps, you can continue to keep using Azure DevOps, no question. But many teams are choosing to start introducing GitHub today. Instead of using Azure repos, they introduce GitHub. They start using GitHub for their code repositories. They start using it for the things I've already mentioned, the great improved security features like Dependabot, the inner sourcing model that can drive potentially up to a 30% performance improvement by adopting not just the tooling, but an inner source mindset. So you can do that today. There are other areas like Azure Boards. Azure Boards is well liked by many of our customers for planning their work, managing their work, their Kanban boards, their sprint boards, the idea of decomposing their work from epics to features down to the tasks themselves. GitHub doesn't have a direct competitor for that. They have GitHub Projects, which is a Kanban board, but really everything's just an issue. So today, if you're using Azure Boards, you probably want to keep using boards. Okay, over time, that will change. Not only will we look to get feature parity with Azure Boards, but it's a new world. We want not just feature parity, but what things were missing, what things can we improve, what feedback have we had from our customers that we can put into making GitHub Projects, even better than what Azure Boards is today. Okay, so the next one I'll talk about is CI/CD. If you've invested in Azure pipelines, you may have used the classic designer, and that continues to work. You can fetch code easily from either Azure repos or from GitHub. But the classic designer, as much as it was nice and easy to use, we've really been focused more on YAML and YAML multi-stage pipelines. So if you're using YAML today in pipelines, you'll find a lot of similarity when you start using GitHub Actions, also built on YAML. Now, the schema is slightly different. We've fixed a little bit of inconsistency in some of the naming and a few other things to improve it. But GitHub Actions, well, that's just YAML we can use today. And GitHub Actions is already, given it was released went GA at the end of last year, it's already the #1 CI/CD solution for both public and private repos across GitHub. That's extraordinary. Within the GitHub Marketplace, there's already a vibrant community with over 5,000 actions in there, dwarfing what's in the Azure DevOps Marketplace. So, there's a lot of great opportunity. So I guess to summarize, if you're using Azure DevOps today, it's probably a great time to look at introducing GitHub. Look at how you can integrate those two products to get the best of both worlds. And we make that financially very attractive, okay? As things arrive in GitHub, I suspect that over time, customers, when they're ready, will start moving things like their boards and work item tracking over to GitHub, but that might be 12 months, it might be 2 years away. Other things like the repos and perhaps GitHub Actions is likely to happen a lot sooner as customers start to see this great value in GitHub. All right, so as far as integrations go, you can have a look in the GitHub Marketplace. And in the GitHub Marketplace, there are some great free integration points so that you can continue to use Azure boards and link your commits in GitHub. So you still get that rich bidirectional traceability. We can sync pull requests. So now if a pull request, a PR is created in GitHub, we can actually have a work item created in Azure DevOps and have that appear on our boards for visibility. One I really like is when a vulnerability is found in GitHub, we could actually have a work item created over in Azure DevOps so that we get high visibility of that and we get to track the examination of that vulnerability and the fix. And if you are using open source and open sourcing some of your work, we can go and create issues in GitHub and have that reflected over in Azure DevOps in our boards. So lots of great interactions for you to choose from. So in wrapping up that, hopefully we've learned about our strategic direction being GitHub going forward, but our full commitment to both products for the foreseeable future. So I think we're coming very close to time there. So what I might do is open it up for some Q&A. So I can't see the discussion, so maybe some of my colleagues there can call out any of the questions that perhaps you'd like me to answer.
We have kept one question for you. Most of the questions are answered. So how do I check the different dependency that I use in my source code? If we depend so much, on so much, do I have to manually update it?
All right, so what GitHub provides for us is we can go into GitHub where our source exists, we can go up to Insights and we can look at the dependency graph. The dependency graph looks at the code base, looks at the files that are in there, lists out all of those dependencies for us and lists out the current version numbers. You've then got another feature of GitHub called Dependabot. And one of the capabilities of Dependabot is that it is aware of all of the vulnerabilities that are out there. It looks at the CVE databases, and if it sees that there's a particular vulnerability in version 1.1.3 of one of those dependent packages, it actually raises that in GitHub, gives us that notification, and even more than that, it then creates and submits a pull request, so it writes the code to bump that version up to a version that doesn't suffer from that vulnerability. Now, it creates the PR, it doesn't change your code. You then review the pull request, and if you agree with that change, you can run your tests, and then you can commit the PR. So it gives you visibility and awareness of your dependencies with known vulnerabilities, and it also writes the code to bump those versions to versions of those dependent packages that don't have the issues. So pretty good.
And would you like to share any good news?
So as far as some good news goes, I alluded to some financial changes. So previously, when, if we roll the clock back a little bit, we had Azure DevOps, and then if you wanted to look at GitHub, you'd need to buy licenses for GitHub. And that kind of seemed a bit of double dipping there for us. So announced on the 1st of October, if you've got a Visual Studio subscription today, so Visual Studio Professional or Visual Studio Enterprise, we've announced that there's a step up promotion available where effectively for less than the cost of a cup of coffee, you'll probably be able to get GitHub licenses probably for as little as, don't quote me on the number, but $1 per user per month or some such thing.
I think it goes in cents actually. So
it's probably cents. It's even less. That's amazing. So effectively, if you've got a Visual Studio subscription, you're getting GitHub licenses today for nickels and dimes kind of thing. So that's some excellent news for our customers, and that means that we can start, bringing GitHub in and leveraging the benefits and power of both of those systems.
Yep, exactly. And also start experimenting, because most of you, I would assume, have Visual Studio licenses. And when you have that, get the GitHub one for a few cents. No one is going to stop you from there. But the best part is start using dependent about the security, all the security features that is in there, and also start using GitHub as more of an inner open source kind of a tool, and start sharing the code internally. Get that whole different kinds of DevOps mentality inside the organization. So, yep. Start that as soon as possible. And also let us know if you have any question as well. I don't see, have you received any further questions? I'll just quickly check. Is Bitbucket supported as a repo? Sorry, didn't understand that question. Bitbucket is definitely a repository, but Bitbucket is another Git-based repository, which is by Atlassian, and we are talking about GitHub. And GitHub is more like, everyone knows GitHub. Let's not talk about it. Come on, yeah. Yeah. Okay, how do I open a GitHub issue? There's another question.
Sure. I guess that's going to depend a little bit on whether you're talking about, do you have your own GitHub instance, whether it's GitHub Enterprise Cloud or GitHub Enterprise Server. When you have those things, you can easily go in, log into GitHub, click issues at the top, and basically create a new issue there. I'm not sure what the origins of the question are. Is that you want to raise a support issue? Have you got a question about GitHub? That might be it. Or if you're using an open source library that's hosted on GitHub, they allow you to basically go into that open source library, look for issues at the top and say, create a new issue there. So issues are very central to the workflow of GitHub.
Yeah.
If I haven't read the question correctly, please.
So if there is any other feedback that comes, or any other second question comes about that, I'll let you know. But then there is another question following that Bitbucket one. Jason has again asked, is about, could I also know how well Azure works with Bitbucket pipeline?
I guess that's something that I haven't personally had experience with. So in looking at Bitbucket, it's, if you look at the Git repositories, you've got Azure repos, you've got GitHub, you've got Bitbucket. So in looking at Bitbucket and Bitbucket pipelines, I would expect, and again, let me qualify that I haven't used it, but as far as a pipeline goes, I would hope and expect that Bitbucket pipelines would allow you to deploy to any vendor cloud easily. I think that would be a centerpiece of kind of any pipeline or workflow product today. So sorry, I can't answer that with experience.
Maybe I can add some things to it. So Azure has got a bunch of APIs released. So whenever you're doing a CI/CD pipeline, you're actually calling the APIs to push your code in there in a form of JSON to get your, whatever the infrastructure or the code that you're trying to deploy there. So actually it goes back to the Bitbucket side, that if they have implemented all those or not. And the same goes for AWS. So they need to implement all those things that actually can go and integrate with the Azure side and deploy whatever is required. Another question, would you say that DevOps should lead the way / speed that dev teams is operating on a daily basis, as well as protect or block the dev team members to interact with the multiple environment or add or remove resources?
Oh, okay, so a few different aspects of the question.
Yep.
So one of the important things is that there's a mind shift. So it's very easy for anyone to maybe jump into an environment, to go into Azure, to use the Azure portal to go and make a change through the UI. You hit a drop down, you see information, you can change things. That's really powerful. But you need to move beyond that and understand, in this case, things like infrastructure as code. The ability for you to use, say, ARM templates or products like Terraform to define those environments in code. That means that code can be versioned. It means you're protecting access to the code, which is very, very easy to do. It means you've got auditability. You can see what and who changed things, but also a quick rollback because you can see what changed. You can also say, look, I want to make this change and change the number of instances in a Kubernetes cluster, let's say. So you change the template. You then commit that code into GitHub and create a pull request. That pull request can require someone else to look at it, another set of eyes, to look at it, review it, to give you a safety net, to make sure you're not making a crazy change here. And then they can say, yes, that's great, we approve it. And that can trigger GitHub Actions or a pipeline to then go and make the change in the environment for you. So I love the idea of, you're not necessarily trying to block people from making changes, but you're putting safety rails there. Teach them, educate them to make the change through infrastructure as code, put workflows in place that you're already using for code today, and then automate those changes out through whatever approval processes you'd like or need to implement. I hope that answers the question.
So I have got one more question and we can finish off after that. Can we get
questions.
the link? Oh, okay, so then we can carry on. People shoot questions. So can we get the link that announced this GitHub license pricing for existing VS license owners?
Yes, I will track that down. I don't know that I've actually seen a link, but
even I haven't seen the link. Yes, it's like more of a surprise news that we are sharing. And then obviously what I'm going to do is like I'm going to put my email address in the announcement there and also my colleague's email address. So just can contact us and we can actually help you get this process done. It's very easy. Yeah. More questions for Anthony. From the slide regarding Azure DevOps, Azure repos mainly versus GitHub, which one is the best practice or recommended for main source control? In which condition will be best for each and the rest CI/CD, etc.? Or should we combine to get the most features, or when should we use integration approach?
Wow. So I guess it depends on where you are today. If you are currently using Azure repos, firstly, if you're using centralized version control, TFVC, I'd look at shifting and moving that. As a pattern, it's been around for a long time. Centralized version control back to the SourceSafe days and lots of other competing products. It's found less and less in modern environments today. So move across to Git within Azure repos. If you're there today, continue using it. It's fantastic. If you're moving from another provider, if you're just looking to start greenfields, I'd probably start with GitHub and I'd use GitHub for all my version control. Over time, you're going to find that, both of them can store source. Absolutely, no question about it. But over time, you're going to see that the GitHub ecosystem around that version control will enable things like Dependabot for security. You can't shift left much more than that. So if I guess Greenfield's GitHub, if you're in Azure DevOps today, that's fine, but you may want to start considering moving that source across or putting GitHub in place for version control and start putting new projects on there. Okay, today I'd say they're very, very similar, but the ecosystem building around GitHub will outpace Azure DevOps over time. Does that answer the question?
Yep, it does. Yep.
Okay. For many customers today, they really like Azure boards. They like that bidirectional traceability. So the integration allows you to bring GitHub in, start using your version control there while still keeping all of that tight integration and full bidirectional traceability. That's where the integration really helps and comes into play.
Yep, perfect. Any other question? I'm just putting the announcement in just so you to get my email address. That's it. Awesome. I think that's it. Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for such an amazing session, Anthony. And if you don't mind, can you just share the feedback? Do we have the QR code for the feedback? If you can share that too.
Ooh, I haven't seen that. I think this was the last slide. Sorry, Sheree.
Okay, no, all good. Otherwise, Peter has already posted the feedback. So please send your feedback to us so that we can always make things better. And we would love to understand how we can actually cater this such that it is useful for you guys. And you guys, actually, whenever you're spending this 1 hour, we want to make sure that's the maximum value that you're getting out of it. So please spend some time to fill up the feedback form and let us know how we can help. Thank you, everyone. See you next week again, same time. Bye.
Bye.